What's your guilty pleasure?
Oh gosh.
I happen to love the drama between Blueface and Chrisean Rock. I love it. I think that that's a pimp, and I think that she got caught up with her pimp.
Jill Scott, you know your big ass didn't have no right coming for none of these kids talking about he a pimp. A pimp is somebody who lies and leeches off of women. If anything, Blue done gave so many women opportunities and careers from them trying to fuck on him for something. They got everything they came for in return. You just mad that last husband that didn't ever marry you, that came for that coffee shop, tricked you out of coffee shop. Now that's a pimp. Okay, somebody that come and pretend they want to be with you.
This one hit different because nobody expected Jill Scott of all people to be the spark. 1 minute the internet was minding its business. The next minute a single word flipped the entire timeline upside down. Pimp. That was it? One label, one moment, and suddenly Blueface was trending again for all the wrong reasons. And before anyone could even decide whether they were offended, confused, or fake outraged for engagement, Karlissa Saffold stepped in like she had been waiting for this exact moment. No soft tone, no industry politeness, just straight smoke. What followed wasn't a disagreement, it was a collision. Old wounds reopened, fandoms clashed, and the internet did what it does best. Turned a serious accusation into a viral gladiator match, and then Chrisean Rock entered the conversation, adding another unpredictable layer to a situation that was already spiraling. This wasn't just a clapback. This was a cultural debate disguised as drama, wrapped in celebrity egos, and sprinkled with just enough chaos to make reality TV look rehearsed. If you thought this was just another messy headline, think again, because once these names collided, the fallout didn't just trend, it detonated. It started the way most internet fires do, quietly and casually, with a comment that didn't sound like it was meant to start a war. One word slid into the conversation and immediately detonated. Pimp, not slang, not a joke, not an offhand exaggeration meant to be shrugged off, a word loaded with history, judgment, and implication. And the moment Jill Scott said it in reference to Blueface, the timeline didn't hesitate. It froze, replayed it, and then exploded. This wasn't a random influencer throwing shade for clicks. This was Jill Scott, a name associated with artistry, maturity, and cultural respect, stepping into a messy, volatile narrative with a label that hit like a brick. People didn't even know how to react at first. Some clutched pearls, some nodded like it confirmed suspicions they'd been carrying quietly for years, others immediately went defensive. Because once you label someone publicly, you're no longer just sharing an opinion. You're setting a narrative on fire and watching where it spreads. Clips of the moment moved faster than context ever could, shortened, cropped, reposted with captions that lean heavy into outrage or applause, depending on the poster's bias. Blogs rushed to frame it as a bold truth-telling moment or an unforgivable overstep. Nobody waited to unpack intent. Nobody slowed down to ask what Jill Scott actually meant. Because slowing down doesn't trend, reaction does. And then Karlissa Saffold saw it. Karlissa doesn't do subtle, and she definitely doesn't do silence when it comes to her family. The moment she clocked that word attached to her son's name, restraint left the building. Her response wasn't polished, wasn't filtered through industry etiquette, and wasn't designed to keep anyone comfortable. It was direct, confrontational, and unapologetic, the kind of response that doesn't aim to calm a situation but to challenge it head-on. Her tone made one thing clear. She didn't see Jill Scott's comment as commentary. She saw it as disrespect wrapped in respectability. Politics to Karlissa, this wasn't about celebrity discourse. It was about labels, character assassination, and what she felt was a line crossed by someone who should have known better. And when she checked Jill Scott, she didn't whisper. She made sure the internet heard every syllable. That's when the Story shifted from discussion to drama. Supporters of Karlissa praised her for defending her son against what they saw as a reckless generalization. They argued that calling someone a pimp wasn't critique, it was branding, and branding sticks in ways apologies never fully erase. Critics, on the other hand, accused Karlissa of overreacting, saying Jill Scott was speaking on behavior, not identity. Two sides formed instantly, each convinced they held the moral high ground. Meanwhile, Blueface himself didn't even need to say a word. His name was doing enough work on its own. Years of controversy, chaotic relationships, and public dysfunction were dragged back into the spotlight like exhibits in a courtroom that never adjourns. To some, Jill Scott's word felt like an uncomfortable truth spoken out loud. To others, it felt like an oversimplified judgment slapped onto a complicated mess. The internet, of course, did what it always does. It turned nuance into noise. Memes started circulating within hours, some mocking the situation, some defending one side aggressively, some pretending to be neutral while clearly picking favorites. The word pimp became the headline instead of the conversation around it. And once a word like that goes viral, it stops being about intent and starts being about optics. Karlissa's response kept replaying, each repost stripping away more context and adding more commentary. People analyzed her tone, her facial expressions, her wording, as if there was a hidden message buried beneath the anger. Supporters called her a mother protecting her child. Critics labeled her defensive and dismissive. Nobody agreed, but everyone had an opinion. And then Chrisean Rock entered the picture. Anytime Chrisean's name gets involved, predictability exits the chat. Her response didn't come wrapped in a press release or careful phrasing. It came raw, emotional, and layered. With personal history, she didn't just react to Jill Scott's comment. She reacted to the entire narrative surrounding Blueface, Karlissa, and herself, and that reaction added gasoline to a fire that was already climbing the walls. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one word. It was about power dynamics, gender politics, cultural authority, who gets to label who gets to speak, and who gets told to stay in their lane. The conversation ballooned from celebrity drama into a cultural tug-of-war disguised as internet mess. Fans started pulling old clips of Jill Scott, trying to frame her comments as consistent or hypocritical depending on their stance. Others pulled up Blueface's past behavior like a highlight reel of evidence. Karlissa's history of speaking out was dissected. Chrisean's past statements were dragged into the present and reframed to fit new arguments. The internet wasn't debating anymore. It was prosecuting, defending, and sentencing all at once. What made the situation even messier was how quickly seriousness and mockery collided. One moment people were talking about exploitation and control. The next moment they were laughing. At memes, moral outrage and entertainment coexisted without shame. That's the internet's specialty, turning complex issues into consumable chaos. As hours passed, the conversation didn't cool. It hardened, people picked sides and stopped listening. Jill Scott supporters argued that she was calling out patterns, not people. Karlissa supporters insisted that labels matter and words have consequences. Chrisean supporters framed her response as justified emotion. Detractors called it deflection. Every angle had a megaphone. By the end of the day, one thing was obvious. This wasn't going to resolve quietly. Too many egos were involved. Too much history was attached. Too many platforms were benefiting from the noise. What began as a single word had become a full-blown spectacle, and nobody seemed interested in pressing pause. Once Karlissa's response started circulating, the situation stopped being a moment and turned into an event. Not the kind you watch casually, but the kind you can't look away from even when it makes you uncomfortable. The internet loves a clash of authority, and this one had all the ingredients. A respected cultural icon, a controversial rapper, a fiercely protective mother, and a volatile ex who never enters a conversation quietly. It was like someone dropped 4 lit matches into a gasoline puddle and told the algorithm to film it. The takes multiplied instantly. Some people framed Jill Scott as brave, calling her comment overdue honesty dressed in grown woman energy. Others accused her of punching down, arguing that using a word like pimp wasn't critique, it was character branding with real-world consequences. The same clip was praised as truth-telling in one corner of the internet and dragged as reckless elitism in another. Context bent depending on who was holding it. Karlissa's voice stayed at the center of the storm. Every repost made her sound louder, angrier, more confrontational. Whether that was fair or not, supporters rallied behind her, insisting she did what any mother would do when a public figure labels her child in a way that sticks. Critics rolled their eyes, saying she thrives in chaos and feeds off controversy. Both sides talked past each other, and neither was interested in middle ground. Then the memes came, because memes are the internet's way of declaring something officially unserious even when it isn't. Jill Scott reaction edits, Blueface caricatures, Karlissa clips remixed with dramatic music. The word pimp turned into a punchline in some spaces and a rallying cry in others. The seriousness of the accusation got flattened by virality, because humor travels faster than nuance every single time. And just when people thought the conversation couldn't stretch any wider, Chrisean Rock's response detonated a second wave. Her reaction didn't try to balance the situation. It didn't aim for neutrality, it came emotionally charged, layered with personal history, resentment, loyalty, and exhaustion. She wasn't just responding to Jill Scott. She was responding to years of commentary about her relationship, her choices, her intelligence, and her role in Blueface's narrative. And when she spoke, it felt less like a rebuttal and more like a release valve snapping. That's when the story stopped being about one word and became about power. Who gets to label someone publicly? Who gets believed? Who gets believed? Who gets protected by respectability? Jill Scott supporters leaned into her status, arguing that her lived experience and cultural insight gave her authority to speak. Karlissa and Chrisean supporters pushed back hard, saying authority doesn't give anyone permission to dehumanize or reduce someone to a label. The timeline turned into a philosophy class taught by people who hate philosophy. Everyone suddenly had opinions on exploitation, gender dynamics, and control, but nobody agreed on definitions. Some argued that calling someone a pimp was naming behavior. Others insisted it was erasing complexity and flattening people into stereotypes. The argument spiraled, looping endlessly without resolution. Blueface's past behavior became the fuel everyone poured on their chosen side. Old clips resurfaced like they were evidence exhibits. People argued over patterns, intent, and accountability. Some said Jill Scott simply verbalized what many had been thinking. Others argued that thinking something privately doesn't justify saying it publicly, especially when millions are watching. What made the escalation even messier was how performative outrage crept in. People weren't just reacting, they were auditioning for moral superiority. Posts got longer, language got louder, phrases like "as a woman," "as a mother," and "as a black person" were deployed like shields and swords simultaneously. The conversation wasn't about understanding anymore, it was about winning. Karlissa continued doubling down, not backing away from her stance. Every response reinforced the idea that she wasn't interested in appeasing anyone. That refusal to soften made her a hero to some and a villain to others. Online, defiance is polarizing. It either gets celebrated as strength or condemned as stubbornness. Rarely is it seen as nuance. Chrisean's involvement kept the temperature high. Her presence ensured the story couldn't settle into a neat debate. Every mention of her reignited old narratives about toxicity, control, and chaos. Supporters defended her emotional reaction as human and justified. Critics accused her of deflecting and escalating. The cycle repeated endlessly, even people outside. The immediate circle started weighing in indirectly. Vague posts appeared referencing calling people out without knowing the full story and using words responsibly. Nobody named names. But everyone knew. Subtweets became landmines. Silence became a statement. Neutrality was treated like cowardice. At this point, the situation felt less like discourse and more like a cultural stress test. How much context does the internet require before it reacts? How much authority does someone need before their words are treated as fact? And how quickly can a serious conversation collapse into entertainment once memes enter the room? The outrage peaked not because anything new was said, but because everyone had said enough. The same arguments recycled with different wording, the same clips reposted with fresh captions. Fatigue crept in, but engagement stayed high. People claimed they were tired of the drama while continuing to share it. The contradiction went unnoticed. Behind the scenes, subtle shifts started happening. People associated with the situation grew quieter, collaboration slowed, distance appeared without explanation. In celebrity culture, absence is a language, and it was speaking loudly. The mess had reached a level where association carried risk. By the time the noise hit its loudest point, clarity was nowhere to be found. What remained was division, documentation, and a story that had outgrown its origin. One word had triggered a chain reaction, exposing fault lines far bigger than any single comment. And as the internet braced itself, one thing became clear: this wasn't heading toward resolution. It was heading toward fallout. By the time the volume finally started to dip, the damage had already settled in like dust after a collapse. Nothing was fixed, nothing was clarified in a way that satisfied everyone. The internet didn't move on because it understood the situation. It moved on because it got tired of yelling. And when outrage gets tired, it doesn't disappear. It hardens into perception. Jill Scott emerged from the chaos with her image bent in a way few expected. To some, she remained a truth teller who dared to say what others only whispered. To others, she crossed an invisible line using her cultural weight to drop a label that carried consequences far beyond a soundbite. The debate around her intent never settled, because intent online doesn't matter as much as impact. Her words were clipped, archived, and replayed without the context she may have intended. And that version is the one that will resurface every time her name trends again. Karlissa Saffold's reputation took a different kind of hit. Supporters framed her as a mother defending her son against what they saw as careless character assassination. Critics painted her as combative, impulsive, and eager to escalate conflict. The truth, as usual, sat somewhere in between, but the internet doesn't. Live in the middle, every future statement she makes will now be filtered through this moment. Whether she speaks softly or loudly, people will already know which version of her they've decided to believe. Chrisean Rock's involvement left the most complicated imprint. Her response didn't just add to the story, it reactivated every unresolved narrative surrounding her relationship, her choices, and her public persona. Supporters saw raw emotion and authenticity. Detractors saw deflection and chaos. And because her history is already so heavily scrutinized, her words didn't exist on their own. They stacked on top of years of judgment, making it impossible for her response to be received cleanly. What followed wasn't resolution, but rearrangement. Relationships shifted subtly. People who once spoke freely grew cautious. Some distanced themselves without explanation. Others stayed loud, leaning into controversy rather than stepping back from it. In celebrity culture, silence can be strategy, and absence often signals risk management. No statements were needed. The changes were visible in what didn't happen. Brands and platforms didn't rush to issue condemnations, but their behavior spoke volumes. Engagement cooled, invitations slowed, associations quietly paused. When chaos starts looking unpredictable instead of profitable, business recalibrates. That recalibration doesn't come with drama, but it's often the most lasting consequence of all. The audience split into familiar patterns. Some viewers declared fatigue, saying they were tired of the constant mess and moral whiplash. Others stayed glued, addicted to the unpredictability, refreshing timelines for the next spark. Ironically, both groups continued watching, because even when people claim they're done with drama, curiosity has a way of keeping them tethered. As days passed, the shock faded into expectation. Another controversial comment wouldn't surprise anyone anymore. Another public clash wouldn't. Raise eyebrows. The bar had been raised so high that comms started to feel suspicious. That's when a saga crosses from scandal into pattern. When dysfunction becomes familiar and outrage becomes routine, the most uncomfortable realization wasn't about any single person involved. It was about the ecosystem that made this moment inevitable, a system that rewards extremes, amplifies conflict, and flattens nuance into shareable outrage. Jill Scott didn't create that system. Karlissa didn't invent it. Chrisean didn't design it. They just collided inside it, and the collision was profitable. As the timeline shifted toward new headlines, this story didn't disappear. It was. Saved screenshots don't expire. Clips don't lose relevance. Allegations don't evaporate. They sit quietly, waiting to be reintroduced the next time one of these names trends. That's how internet memory works. It doesn't forgive. It reloads. What lingered longest was the unresolved question at the center of it all. Not who was right, but who gets to define someone publicly? Who gets to label behavior? Who gets believed when narratives collide? Those questions never got answers because they rarely do online. They just resurface in new forms. By the time the dust settled, one truth stood out louder than everything else. This wasn't an ending. It was a checkpoint. Too much history remains. Too many emotions are unresolved. Too many incentives still reward escalation over clarity. If you're still here, congratulations, you just watched the internet turn one word into a cultural cage match. This wasn't just drama. This was a live demonstration of how fast respect turns into smoke, how quickly opinions become verdicts, and how the timeline never waits for context. One comment, one reaction, one response, and suddenly everyone's picking sides like it's a championship fight with no referee. Now don't sit there acting neutral. Smash that like button like it just called your favorite artist something crazy and expected no consequences. Drop a comment and tell me exactly where you stand, because I already know you've been arguing in your head since minute 5. Was that line crossed? Or was it finally spoken out loud? Say it with your chest. The comment section is where the real conversations happen. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and fix that immediately. Hit that subscribe button like it's the last lifeboat before the internet spirals again. Because stories like this don't end, they evolve. This channel doesn't do safe takes or polite silence. We break down celebrity chaos, decode viral meltdowns, and expose the cracks behind the fame, and turn on notifications, because the next headline is already warming up. Another live will go left. Another quote will get clipped. Another response will flip the narrative overnight. You don't want to catch this stuff late when everyone's already arguing without you. This saga might look quiet right now, but silence online is just the calm before the next screenshot drops. Stay sharp, stay curious, stay messy. This is fame. FLAWS, where celebrity perfection gets tested and the truth always slips through the cracks.